my last month there when you had taken off the last 2 weeks. And he goes, a lot of people come here, they work a day, then they go over to the lake and sit there and sunbathe all day. That's the last thing I want to do.
I feel like when I only have like 2 weeks to work there, that I have to like knock out a bunch of stuff.
You know, I felt that even as a month, man. I was cranking to the last.
Yeah.
That little kiln, I love that little, what is that, got to be a 6-7 cubic foot kiln I was firing.
That little gas kiln?
Yeah, that little gas kiln. Yeah, it needs to be replumbed entirely, but well, what a beauty. All
right,
I got some chinos out of that.
Yeah, you did. We're recording. We're not live on Facebook yet, but we are recording to the cloud.
Nice.
Okay, Brian Benford just texted me. Are you drinking yet? you never got a chance to meet Brian, but
no, we didn't.
He'll have to come up with us one time for this. He works with veterans down in San Diego area.
Oh, okay.
You know, and he's. I'm going to text him back and say yes. Just a second here. Yes.
Right. I'm going to, Kate, can you bring it up on your, you don't have to do anything, but just make sure we're live.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up now.
Okay, thank you.
Making sure.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, not that. Okay. All right. So we will go live now.
Okay, Brian was texting me how to get on. You got to go Hudgens, live Hudgens or something, live at Hudgens or.
If he just goes to the, or they just go to the Facebook page of the Hudgens, just the Hudgens Center Facebook page, it'll be, it'll say like live.
Yeah. Okay.
They can click on that, but if they can't make it, we will put it on our YouTube channel tomorrow. And I'll send you that link too, so you can send that to me when you want.
Cool.
Well, the good news is that we're live on Facebook right now.
Awesome.
Good evening and welcome everybody out there in digital technology land. I am Ty Nicholson, the ceramic studio manager at the Hudgens, and we are joined today with Kate Driscoll, the exhibitions
Hello.
Program manager, and of course, our very special guest, Michael Aschenbrenner, renowned glass artist, or artist who uses glass, veteran and educator. How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Tyler. I hope everybody's well there.
Yes, I think we're all doing well. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on who is Michael Aschenbrenner?
Let's see. Well, we'll start with my Army time. They say, I'll give you the quick version. When I got out of the Army, I took psychology classes to try to figure out who I was and what I had gone through. And then I switched to math because I always liked math. And then I saw all these people come out of the pottery shop with clay rubbed all over their pants. I think, they probably did that intentionally because it was so cool back in the 70s. Anyway, so I started taking clay classes, and then I sort of started to find out who I was. A lot of meditative, contemplative stuff happens when you work with clay. So anyway, long story short, I just work. I like to work, and I stayed with clay for years. And then someone showed me how to do glass, and that took my life over for 25 years. And then now recently, I'm going back to some clay, partly because it's we're in the lockdown, and I have my studio in the back, and also that the cost of running a glass shop is extraordinarily high right now. When I shut off, I was paying about $3,000 a month in utilities, so it became astonishingly high. And this is true for all glass workers in the country. So there's a lot of co-ops that have popped up, and but unfortunately where I live, there's none. But again, I'm going back to my roots in clay. I started with clay. I've always liked clay. I've taught clay. Clay's the way.
So they say.
Yeah.
Hey. So can you? You're often referred to as one of the first people to use glass in a more sculptural manner. What kind of led you to that? point?
You know, I've heard that, but I don't really pay a lot of attention to that. I think I remember when I left the clay world, into the glass world, for one really clear reason, a couple of reasons. But basically, the next day my piece was done. You know, no waiting for grind, firing, blah, blah, blah. It was instant gratification in the glass. And I did a few years of wanting to make Tiffany reproductions, and then I just got totally burned out of that, and went into complete sculpture and focused on that. And this was in mid-1970s. In grad school, I started in 1975 at the University of Minnesota under Kurt Hord, and at the time Warren McKenzie was there also. I always wanted to do sculpture in clay, but I couldn't get it to do what I wanted it to do back in the day. So I got into glass, and as you know, glass is a frozen liquid. Basically, it's referred to. It takes a shape, and as it cools down, it freezes in that position. I didn't know enough about clay in order to make that happen. Also, it took too long. I was far more at that time into instant gratification. So that led me into the glass, and again, 25 plus years of that. And I've been very, very lucky and blessed. You know, that people have liked the work, shown the work, and some have actually bought the work. And some get some stuff as a wedding present.
That's right.
Yeah.
Especially if you ask often enough.
So anyway, I did a lot of teaching over the years. I moved to New York in 1978. And I was only going to go for 3 months. I went to Susan Peterson's Claywork studio on a 3-month residency program. And I thought, okay, I'll do 3 months and then I'll go back to California. And 3 months quickly turned into 15 years. And I tell you, that was the best move that I had ever made. I learned about art history. I got to see actual painting, meet real artists. My neighbors were some really, really powerful artists, and you know, they're very friendly. Contrary to the Hollywood scene out here, where it's all pretentious, the New York scene, I think, was pretty nice. Everybody's helpful. We did studio visits. You know, I mean, I had a calendar. This is way before computers, so I had this little date book thing I kept. We'd write down, you know, oh, I got a studio visit next Tuesday with Robin, blah blah blah, you know, and everyone did that. It was very kind of a nice community back in the 80s. You know, I moved there in 78 and I stayed till 93. But teaching was how I supported myself. I got a job at a private school in Queens and commuted every day, 5 days a week. And, you know, I mean, it paid me enough to live. And years later, a lot of my art friends said, well, where are you during the day? You know, thinking I'm sleeping in, right? You know, I got up at 5 a.m., got on the subway by 6, and 13-mile ride to where I was teaching. It was an hour actually on the subway because they had all the local stops. Mm-hmm. And I stayed till 2:30, and bam, back on the subway, back to my studio. Worked in the studio till about 6, and then I started going to openings at night. And this is in the Soho area. And you know, that's how I just lasted for 15 years. Mm.
What like age level were you teaching at the time?
This was a private high school program that I was teaching in ceramics. I got hired to teach specifically ceramics, but that quickly moved into teaching painting and drawing and anything else they wanted, you know, and coaching Saturday, which caused me to have a problem. Coach Saturday's track. You know, I know nothing about track, and Saturday is my day in the studio. So we had conflicts over that, but I worked for 10 years, and that was okay. Then I moved on to, well, I stayed in New York 5 years after I lost my job. It's a tuition-based school, and they lost 3 people, which was, 4 people. That was like $40,000 a year they lost. So there was a huge turnover in faculty, you know, primarily for economic reasons. Mm-hmm. But then I was allowed to work in my studio. I knew a lot of people from Sweden, of all places, that were in New York, and they needed a place to live for a couple months out of the year. So they'd come to my place, and I'd rent them. You know, they'd pay half my rent and sleep on the floor. I mean, they were great. They were great, you know. And they ended up helping me with the rent for like the last 5 years I was in New York. So they were real cool. You know? But anyway, I ended up moving out of there. At a certain point in your life, you realize that New York's, if you don't have money, lots and lots of money, living in New York is very tedious, like anything. Anyway, so I moved to New Mexico, and that didn't work out too well. So I moved from New Mexico to California, back to California, my roots. And I always thought I'd stay here for a couple of months, maybe a year, and then I'd go back to New York, but that never happened.
If you don't mind my asking, you said you spent some time in New Mexico. Is that for like professional reasons, like the art scene? Was it like what you were hoping?
Yeah, I was with the gallery in New York, who's now out of business, and she was showing the work, so she invited me to come down. I decided I would just stay in the area for a while, but you know what happens in Santa Fe in the early '90s to mid '90s, and even probably today, everybody from LA and New York wanted to move there. So I was not escaping anything that I knew in New York or Los Angeles. Everybody had relocated to Santa Fe, and it became a bit pretentious. And the art scene, you know, how much cowboy art can you look at? I mean, it's okay to.
How much turquoise?
Yeah, right, turquoise. Yeah. So
you guys haven't met my mom.
Oh.
One day. Yeah. So I got tired of Santa Fe. It's too new age, too crystally for me. I was much more wanting to work in a studio, and the rents, everything had skyrocketed in the early '90s in terms of price. What could have been bought for $200,000 was now $1 million, you know, in the mid '90s. So that's what happened when LA and New York moved to Santa Fe. You know, so I decided to come back to California and spend some time with my aging parents, which was great. You know, they've passed away since, but it was a great thing. I don't regret that one bit. What I don't like about LA is the traffic and the crowds. You know, but
I feel like New York would be kind of on a level with that.
It is, but I was younger. I was tougher. I was a lot tougher back in those days. You know, but I also had a purpose to be in New York. If you lose your purpose for wherever you're at, you're done. You know, you have to focus. You have to stay completely disciplined and do what you want to do. And everybody's going to tell you no. And you just have to work through it.
And career-wise, do you think, I mean, obviously that was one of the things that helped propel you quite a bit, because you were, you know, a combination of in the right place in the right time, but then also an extremely hard work ethic. I feel like New York has changed for a lot of artists now because of social media and access to digital technology. We can present ourselves in a much more, I don't know, more people can see our work.
Right. It's a whole different world. You know, there's no really reason to live in New York anymore because, you know, everything's gone digital. The galleries are learning now with this lockdown business with COVID-19. They're going digital and they're doing just fine. You know, it appears they are. The rents are way too high. I was showing with Rosa Espin Gallery in the late 80s, and her rent went from $3,000 to $10,000 a month.
In the late 80s?
In the late 80s. And that was, I mean, I guess today's dollars, that's got to be $50,000 or more. But she got, you know, she just got pushed out of business. She was old enough where she had enough money to retire. And today I would guess that same space is renting for probably, it's a ground floor in Soho. So it's got to be $50,000 or more a month. So that's prohibitive. But again, that forced all the artists and a lot of galleries to move to Brooklyn. But now, from what I understand, Brooklyn has become just as problematic. You know, I don't know how anybody gets any art done in New York any longer. Just survival is just so, it's difficult, you know, as in any big city, you know, but I moved to the suburbs. I'm 30 miles outside Los Angeles, a half acre. And my wife she likes trees and plants and fruit. So we have lots of that around. And I have my studio built in the back, and I could not have done that in New York. You know, it was not at all possible for me to have a half acre in New York City.
So I don't want to like simplify your body of work, but I think like one of the things that you're really known for is your Broken Bone series and your glass work.
The Damaged Bone series.
Your Damaged Bone series, yeah, excuse me. But you've, as with anyone, you're moving away from that since you're not working with glass as much anymore. You're now working with the tiles. Do you want to talk about your tile work that you've been doing?
Yeah, what's interesting is I've started to actually to actually combine some of the glass with the clay. Which you have some of those photos on site. they seem to work fine. Long ago, I quit thinking what anybody cared about what I do, you know, in terms of artwork. You know, I learned also through teaching and through, you know, other artists in New York. If you worry about what other people are saying, yeah, you're not going to get much done. But the new pieces is a transition from the clay from the glass, in this case, to the clay. And some of the pieces I do actually are straight clay. I have an electric kiln. I don't have a gas kiln. I'd like to build a gas kiln. You know, I like reduction. I like Shino glazes a lot. But we'll see. I like doing clay. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that, but clay is earthy. You can grab it, you can squeeze it. And I still remember the first piece I ever made in clay. You know, I gave it away to an old girlfriend, you know, back then, but I still have it. I still remember what it looks like. It was about 8 inches tall. It was off center and had thick wall on one side and skinny wall on the other side. You know, we were doing wheel work at the time. But that was quite an wearing thing for me. When it became mushy, squishy clay and it got fired, it became something else. You know, it got transformed into something that's permanent. And today, the clay today is pretty much the same thing. If I can make it, and as I said, I have an electric kiln here now. I can fire it, and it stays that way for millions of years or whatever the deal is. But one thing I'd like to say about clay and glass is that when I was in clay, I knew a whole lot about the technical aspect, and I think that restricted me from being creative and free. And so when I moved into glass, I did not want to know how come the glass worked. I didn't care about anything, I knew enough about annealing cycles to where the glass wouldn't crack, but I did not want to know anything technically because it just got in the way of my creativity.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway, the pieces I'm working on currently are kind of autobiographical, and they're biographical about other people too. The imagery is real simple. It's sort of childlike, and I've always liked that kind of drawing. Like Basquiat, Jean-Michel Basquiat, I've always liked his work. Excuse me. He lived up the street from me, and I remember coming home from teaching when he had OD'd and died. That was just such a heartbreak, you know. But anyway, the biographical stuff started way back when I decided I wanted to make art, which is in the 70s. What can I say about my experiences as a human being? And I had already been back from a war zone, Vietnam in this case. And it was not a very popular war. It was just quite the opposite. And you most veterans never admitted to being veterans. It became a very ugly scene in the 70s. Even through the 80s, it was a problem. So I knew a guy who got wounded pretty bad. He ended up being an amputee, and I used him. His name's Richard Harris. I used him as an alter ego for me to express what I wanted to say. And we were kids. That's how come the whole childlike thing comes back into play with images I use. We were 17, 18, 19 years old in a combat zone. And when you think back at that, it's pretty bizarre, you know. But what 27-year-old would even go to combat? They'd tell you to go to hell. You know, so Richard became my alter ego in order to express what happened to me through him. And it was well received in that sense. But I always wondered if I would have talked about myself in first person, you know, how people would have taken that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a question I think about a lot, and when I talk to other veterans or people who are artists and then also veterans at the same time, it's like, do you have to be both at the same time, or does one depend on the other? And that's a question I asked Aaron Toole as well. You know, it's like, because you're a veteran, do you have to make work about war all the time?
That's a great question. The answer is no, but I did other work for years. I did a lot of paintings for your abstract paintings and stuff, which I really liked. But I also found myself scratching through the paint, drawing parachutes and M16s. You know, I mean, as you know, it's a profound experience to go through something like that. It's a life-death situation. You know, politics aside, it affects you for the rest of your life.
Sorry.
But I make more than cups. I do other things than cups. I love Aaron.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that, even if you're not making work directly related to that, it's something that just will always kind of sneak through, I think, in a way.
It does. Yeah, I find my best work happens when I'm really tired, and becomes a situation where I'm just making without thinking. And that's the best work. When my brain takes over, I stop thinking. I stop making artwork. For me, my best work happens, late. It used to be late at night. Today it could be any time when I'm tired, and it just happens. And when my brain just says, just put the brain on pause, and then everything else just starts creating. I don't have to worry about why this balances on a composition. I just do it, and then later on I can see it. And oftentimes my unconsciousness is much smarter than my consciousness.
That's so interesting you say that. And then you're also talking about how you don't want to think about the composition or technical aspects. And you're talking about how when you went into glass, you didn't want to find out how that was technically happening.
Yes.
So it does sound like there's a bit of a pattern in the way you're approaching it.
I think so. Yeah.
You don't want the magic to be gone of thinking about it.
I love the magic. I mean, as I said, the first time I got a piece out of the pottery kiln, I was absolutely amazed, that I did that. It's like giving birth, right? I mean, it's just amazing, and the glass thing happened much quicker overnight. I was able to hold this thing I started working with, which was a liquid at that time, the day before, and then it's a solid matter the next day. It's quite a nice thing to have happen to you. But I work every day. I mean, I like to work in the studio, and I don't know if that's because of the veteran thing. I don't know. The work ethic is amazing, for veterans. Every veteran I know, short of some that are just, drug dependent and all that, but most of them work really hard and want to do something positive in their life, and just, with no fame or fortune, just they're just in there working, doing whatever job they have, whether it's a mechanic or an artist. They're just working hard, and I suppose that has something to do with being in the military. They train you pretty hard to break that kind of training.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for creative expression too, is just having an outlet of sorts. And
right.
If it's not copious amounts of drugs and alcohol, it's like you need something to focus an energy into.
Yeah, well, I went through a big period of alcohol at one point in my life, early on, and I decided that wasn't working for me. When you're young, you can do a lot of stuff and get away with it, but when you get older, it doesn't do the same thing. Like if I smell a beer, I get a headache. So I don't do that much anymore. And I never did like pot. All my friends do, and that's okay. It's their deal. And but I prefer just sipping whiskey, more than anything.
Nice. So when you got back from Vietnam, did you immediately transition back into college to, start your degree, start your education career?
I did. I got an early out to go to college, 52-day early out, which seemed like a million years to me because I was just waiting to get out. So my ETS day was actually June 10th, which is coming up in 6 days. I never forgot that. June 6th, 1970, I got out. And that was the beginning of my life. In a sense, I was no longer under my father's rule. The military was gone, so I didn't need to worry about any of that. And I was in charge of everything that I did. I was in charge of. So that was kind of a cool thing. And I've remained that way all my life. Responsibility for whatever I did, right and wrong.
And how old were you when you got out?
I was just shy of 21. Not even old enough to have a beer, and I'd been in combat.
Yeah, that's still, I imagine that still is really young to be just totally on your own and totally saying, oh my gosh, I'm taking total control of my life.
Yeah, I think I remember in Vietnam, the first time I got shot at. I rarely tell stories about the war, but the first time I got shot at, I remember this. Somebody hit a tree, the bullet hit a tree, bark was flying down my back. And I thought, God damn, I'm gonna get out of this mess somehow, and I'm gonna do something with my life. And it gave me purpose to stay alive. And when I got out, I got a job at the post office, and that turned out to be a total disaster. The post office was started and run by former military, and I was not in the mood to take any more orders. So that lasted about 3 months. I told them to stick it. And on my way out, I said, I'm going to college, and I'm going to do something with my life. They're all. Their jaws dropped to the ground. I had a full-time job for life, and that was pretty hard to get back in those days. Maybe still is, but you know, I just, I told him I left. I never looked back, you know. I don't, in everything I've done in my life, I very rarely look back, and I have no regrets on anything. Everything happens for some reason, and it takes me to where I am today. Yeah, so that's kind of the way I've lived my life.
Well, good for you. I think so many people fantasize about having that, sticking it to a moment and actually saying that, but so few people do it. Yeah. So more people just quietly quit and just never come back.
Well, and in their defense, it's in the 70s, it was pretty easy to say that and walk away looking pretty good. Today, I don't know that you can do that today. The economy is a whole different deal today, you know, which we could talk about, but that's a whole nother subject, you know.
It's a whole nother Hudgens talk.
Whole nother deal, yeah. Whole nother Hudgens talk. Yeah, but in terms of making art, physical objects, I like making stuff. I don't know, Ty, were you with us at that place in Joseph, Oregon? We were having hamburgers at some outdoor place, but some guy came up and was ranting and raving that we're makers. You know, what kind of artists can we be if we make stuff? He was some kind of conceptual freak. I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't know, but he sounds like a friend of the Haaslockers for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so he and I got in this conversation about that, and the bottom line is, if you don't make something, your words become the artwork, and then they drift off when people forget. Mm-hmm. Nothing remains. But as makers, make something physical, we have the ability to have that stay on past our lifetime. And that becomes our story, mm-hmm. You know, our history. As I said, this is one of the statements I said when I was teaching. Art is an idea, it's a concept, it's pure thought. The object is what's left after. Excuse me. The object is what's left after when we're gone to contemplate. So that when you go to a museum, that's why I like going to, again, back in New York, that was great because I could go to real museums and sit there for hours if I wanted and just look at the work and think about what the artist thought about, and also what was going on in society at the time the artist made this particular piece. Because no artist lives in a vacuum. Everything that happens in their life affects their artwork. Otherwise, they're just designers and decorators. Yeah,
So what, since you have had just such, you know, like a career and a journey in the art world, I'm curious to hear what things you've really liked about it and what things have just been turnoffs for you.
Well, the turnoffs are easy, just when people are making art for being famous. There were a lot of painters I knew in New York that were basically assholes. You know, they would pretend to be artists so they could get in line at Studio 54, you know, and you'd get invited in right away. You know, although I've never been to Studio 54, I never liked that scene. You know, the crowd, being a veteran, the crowds bother me.
How do you pretend to be an artist? I wonder at that time, do you wear like a beret?
Yeah, they get dressed up. They have a little uniform they wear, and they think that's cool. You know, but the real artists look pretty grubby, and they got, you know, they're pretty much unbathed, unkempt, and working in the studio all the time. You know? Yeah. They never got invited to Studio 54.
If you went to Studio 54, you're not an artist. You heard it here first.
Pretty much. Although I had friends that went there, and it was a good scene. It was a party scene, you know. That was in the early 80s. But I preferred CBGB's because that was right around the corner for me, you know, the rock and roll place, punk place. And the Mud Club was there, but they had closed down pretty much when I got there. But New York was an experience. You know, everything that I was with was dealing with creativity, whether it was with musicians or painters, sculptors, clay people. Everybody was talking about creativity, and it was a really exciting time. You know, it was like a renaissance for me, and to experience all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And again, stuff you cannot learn in art history classes. You know, I took like 10 art history classes throughout graduate school, and I never learned much. But when I actually got to New York, well, I should say that's not fair. When I did learn things, but it didn't really make any sense until I got to New York. You know, and then everything sort of just kind of came together, and I started to understand stuff. Like one of my early art history professors, first class in painting art history I ever had, I asked her, well, why do people paint? You know, and I was serious. It was a serious question. And I said, is it because they didn't have a camera, you know, to take a picture? You know, and she like looked at me like, what the fuck? Are you crazy? But that was a legit question. And I guess it took her by surprise and she didn't know how to answer that. But anyway, there it is. What else would you like to know?
So much.
Well, I guess I'd like to know, I guess like the flip side of the coin, or like what were things that you liked about it that you got, was it just that you got to learn so much, to put things in context, like from your education, like you were saying?
Yeah. Well, when I moved to New York, it wasn't just to be an artist. It was to start my life, to live. As I said, I always just hung around the art world. I just liked all the art people. I did have one relationship with a woman who was working for Citibank, or I think, or Bank of America. That didn't end well. You know, we had nothing in common. So my whole world was basically within the art world. I did work at the New York Experimental Glass Workshop at the time. Richard Yell started that, which was my saving grace for glass. You know, when I left graduate school, I didn't know how I was ever going to do glass again. And then ending up there and meeting Richard Yell. He'd already had a studio built, and he invited me in to make some stuff. And then it became a huge thing. It's now called Urban Glass. It's in Brooklyn. They're very successful. They're a nonprofit organization, and they're great people, really wonderful people. If anybody goes to New York, you have a place to work in glass.
You also, you know, received quite a few pretty prestigious artist grants while you were there in New York. Was that during that entire time there?
Yes. Yeah, I was very fortunate with the grant. Well, the first grant I ever had was the Pollock Krasner grant. I was really broke, and I applied, and it takes about a year for the process to go through with Pollock Krasner. And I didn't know this for years later, but one person on the panel voted me in, and it said, let's say if there were 10 people on the panel, 9 said, no, your work is terrible, because I was using glass, you know, crafty material. And then one person said, oh no, we're going to give this guy the grant. So I got $10,000, you know, and I've never met the artist that was on the board, but he's you know, he was awesome. If I ever meet him, it's Jasper John, who's the artist that did that. He did that for me. Otherwise I would have been destitute. But he liked the work enough to say, let's give him a grant. That's
kind of like a pretty big person to have in your corner there.
Yeah, it is. But as I said, I didn't know who it was for years. I'm probably still not supposed to know that, but I knew someone that worked inside the organization that whispered that in my ear one day. They'll remain nameless.
Well, you received that grant twice, correct?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yes. I got it when I moved out here. I found that coming to LA, it was economically as bad as New York, and I didn't have a job. I was substitute teaching in high school just to pay a rent, you know, and I applied for the Pollock Krasner again, and I got it. I was very fortunate. Then I got an NEA in between all that too, and that was great. You know, but that's just to keep you going. You know, all that's just, you know, money to keep you working for a year or two, and then you know, I guess it's taking responsibility and figuring out what are you going to do to survive as an artist. Sometimes you have to take those jobs that just suck, you know, just to go do your work. You know, if it's that important to you, you will do that. You know, and contrary, if it's not important to you, then you're probably really not in the right field.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you felt about teaching? Like it was just a way to help pay the bills, like a steady thing, or did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed teaching, but that's a side note. It was basically it was a means to an end. You know, I needed money to live, and teaching was what I could do, and I found out I could do that fairly good, and I guess successfully. But it's also very draining. A lot of the artists that I met tell me that they hated teaching because it just drained them of every ounce of creativity they had. But for me, it didn't work that way. So I got a lot of energy from my students. You know, a lot of ideas too. They were great. You know, because I set up a studio with permission from the school. I had a studio right there in the classroom where I was teaching, and the students were allowed to see the work that I was working on, and sometimes, you know, they would go in and work with me making pieces. And so that worked out well for both. You know, I thought it was great.
Oh, that's really cool. My next question was going to be, did teaching like inform your work at all, or change anything over time?
It made me able to talk about the work better than prior to that. I mean, in grad school, I stumbled talking about the work because it was so fresh and new. I didn't know what it was about. All I knew, I was making bone pieces. And I didn't even know that until one of my friends, Tom Fleming, said to me, you know, boy, these sure look like bones. Where the hell are these coming from? Because most of them did not know my history of Vietnam. And so within the for 10 years later, I started to put that story together in my head, how that did, you know, sort of forever penetrate my psyche. And then I just accepted it. And rather than deny, I just accepted it. And I was lecturing once at the Corning Museum, and I told the whole crowd, yes, I'm a combat veteran. And it was, nobody blinked an eye. That was 1983. So that was quite a thing for me to have that happen. You know,
that's something you'd been publicly hiding from for quite a bit, and that's why you were using Richard.
Yes,
Richard Harris's.
Yeah, exactly. So at that point, after the Corning thing, I was able to own my own work and talk about it better.
And that was what seemed like a very liberating experience.
It was, yeah. The first time I lectured publicly, and it was 300 people in an audience, and I thought, God, this is a lot of people listening to me talking. And all of a sudden the lights went down and I couldn't see anybody. And it was just, then that was really easy. It was back in the day when I had to say, next slide, please. You know, no computers at all. It's just, there was a guy in a slide room projectionist that was working in coordination with me on this stuff. So, unlike today.
Now you have to do it all by yourself.
Yes, you do. You're doing very well at that. Yeah. But the other part of my work, besides the damaged bone series, is tools. I really like tools. You know, whenever I get a chance, I go into tool stores and look at them. In fact, up at LA's project, when we were up there together, Ty, there was in Losteen, Oregon, there was a secondhand store. There's nothing but tools, you know, dating back for probably up to 100 years back. And it's a great old guy that owns it, but he'd let me walk through that place and take photographs and stuff, and just kind of feel the history of the tool. So that kind of moved into my work of creating what I call the implement series. Tools have histories, you know, much different than the damaged bone series. The implement series became something that's more lyrical, more fun, you know, and easier to live with, I think.
Yeah, I'm always curious how other people view your work, because, you know, I'm viewing it through the lens of another veteran. So like we have, even though our experiences are 40 years apart, you know, there is still like many overlapping similarities. So like I feel like I can read between the lines quite a bit, and, you know, maybe even incorrectly, but then I always wonder how like Joe Civilian would approach your work, and what kind of read that they would get off of it.
Well, that's a good point too, because I prefer hearing what they have to say about my work, me explaining to them what the work is about. I mean, Jasper Johns, who famously said, I don't know what my work is about. You tell me. You know, and that's a pretty good thought. You know, it sort of draws out. Dale Chihuly, by the way, does the same thing. He would rather you talk about what you think his work is about than what he thinks it's about. And I learned from both those guys on that, you know, to just let the work do what it does and let other people think whatever they want to think about it. And oftentimes, you know, they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but, you know, averaged together, they can help you move it to the next level.
Have you had any really memorable reactions to your work?
Yeah, I had a female woman I met. I didn't really know. She just came up. She was an amputee from, you know, not the war, nothing to do with military, but she goes, oh, your work is so powerful, but I could never live with this because I'm an amputee. And that really stuck with me. I understand that, you know, it's not for everybody. You know, I don't make pretty things. They basically what my work does, it reminds you of what you want to forget. And,
I'm writing that one down. That's good.
Yeah, there you go. My work reminds me of what you want to forget.
Oh, that's so true. And then you can't, because it's in the house with you.
Yeah, well, I'm comfortable with my own work. That's just I always was. But I, to tell you the truth, I was taken back by the success of the Damaged Bone series. I had no idea that people, particularly the other artists, really responded strongly to that. Then when I wanted to switch away from any kind of military kind of thing, I did paintings, and none of them thought that that was a good idea. They had no positive thing to say about anything other than the Damaged Bone series back in the 80s. So I guess there's a lesson there too. Just follow your instincts. Don't worry about getting into some big gallery, because they'll probably screw you anyway. Just make your work. I mean, the idea of living as an artist, living for a big gallery show, that's kind of ridiculous for me. That's part of that thing about being in line at Studio 54 to get into the club. I'm an artist, blah blah blah. And I think you just need to make your work, and everything else will follow. I met a guy once in a bar. He was an artist. He goes, just do your work and everything will follow. Boy, that was true. Just no matter what that is, whether it's success financially or just success in developing your artwork, or just success in staying alive, just everything will follow. Forget about the fame thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the riches too.
Do you think that still is a big thing? People really chasing the fame in the art world?
I don't know, because I haven't been in New York in a lot of years. When I left, it was, and in Santa Fe it was. And to some degree, it was in LA too. But LA is a harder city to live in because of the distance, the miles. It's really hard to do studio visits in LA. I mean, this is on a Sunday morning when no one else is on the road. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know too many younger artists anymore, other than through the Facebook. And there's no talk about that fame business that I could see. So you might be right.
I feel like success now is judged by if you can get a teaching job or not. Pretty much.
Yeah, but that goes back to when I got out of grad school. I did not get a teaching job, and boy, I felt pretty horrible on that one too. But and then to keep that job for the rest of your life, that's a whole nother deal too.
Yeah, it definitely does open up the studio doors a little bit more, for sure. If you're not, slinging cable for DirecTV.
Yeah, right. But I found with teaching, I'm no good at this. I had to watch my tongue. I had to be careful what I said, because you're just going to get laid off or fired, or just, never ask back,
Well, like I said, I mean, feel free, because we had a couple of interviews back. It was pretty loose-lipped. LaDonna says she's enjoying the frank and honest discussion. Wanting to and being able to forget are two different things. Even with art that reminds us, we retain the memories.
Yes, that's very true. Very true. I mean, why would you not want to retain the memories? That's all part of who you are. Even bad experiences, hopefully they can be a positive effect on your life, somehow.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the creative process is a huge tool to turning those negative thoughts and those negative experiences into something positive.
Well, again, back in the early days of my clay work in the 70s, I became contemplative, very, very contemplative. That I would be making these things on the wheel, and the wheel's hypnotic to start with, and I would sit there for 6, 7, 8 hours a day just making these pots. And it became a way for my noisy mind to shut down, and for my inner self to deal with it, with whatever I had gone through at the time. So, yeah.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
No, you go. You go.
No, you. Oh, no, I can't think of it. I was really excited. You go ahead, Ty.
Okay. So one thing, since many of you might not know, but Michael and I have done a couple residencies together at the LH Project, which is throughout the years an artist residency, and then in the summer, the residency is turned over to a veteran artists kind of summer program. And so Jacob Hasslacher, the owner of the residency, invites different veteran artists from around the country to come and make work. But I've been able to see Michael working in the studio firsthand, and it's not unlike the flight of the bumblebee. There is a lot of activity and a lot of action going on.
Yeah.
So because, and you create so much work and so much great work so quickly, I'm wondering if you worked with glass in the same manner.
Yeah, I do in a sense, because you have to pay attention to the glass to finish it. Otherwise, you're going to burn yourself, or it's going to fall off and crack or hit the ground. I do like making stuff. I guess the thought for me is there's never enough stuff in my studio. But the contradiction of that is I would love to have a clean studio, but I've never had one. I work with parts. Even with the clay, I make parts out of the clay, and I sometimes fire and glaze them, and then I put those parts aside, and then they fit into a piece later on down the road. And with the glass, damaged bone series pretty much developed as two rods, basically two rods like this that I wanted to make a long piece. I didn't know what they were going to be, but two pieces, and I stuck them together like this, and then I had something twice as long. That's kind of the thought I had when I made these. And the development of a creative process is something for me that takes a lot of work, a lot of pieces. I know some people just say, well, get a pencil and paper out and just draw your ideas out and you can resolve a lot of stuff. I don't work like that. I have to make the physical object and then look at it for days, sometimes months. And sometimes there's a little hint in the piece I made. There's a little hint for maybe a year, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years down the road. I look at that piece and go, boy, that's what I was trying to do. And that takes me back another leap in the history of my art. I said earlier, I like math. I was looking at the history of math, the development of the first derivative in calculus, and the development of the second derivative, which seems like it should have been a week later. It was 20 years later that the second derivative came around. So lots of thought, and that sort of is the way I make art. Again, I don't worry about, am I making an art piece today? I don't know. Down the road, sometimes years later, I look at, like the damaged bone series, I didn't even see it as really a viable statement until a lot of my friends started looking at it and started talking to me about it, and then they would pull out these ideas that I had in my subconsciousness. Those thoughts, especially when they deal with military and war and such, they don't come out. Those thoughts don't come out very easily. They have to be kind of drawn out very slowly, like Mark Knott on his fishing pole, just pulling in that fish, right?
Yeah.
Just very slowly and subtly. I have a real good friend out here, Brian Benford, who's real good. We talk a lot about my time in the military and stuff. He's much younger. He's in his 40s, like you guys, or not everyone, but one of you. It's good to have friends like that we can just bounce stuff off of. And we talk a lot about art. It's not like the LH project, but all the time.
Yeah. If only the LH project was all the time.
Gosh, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? Thank you, Jacob, for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ted. Ted, by the way, this is Ted Juby's cup here. Ted Juby in Joseph, Oregon. No, Enterprise, Oregon. The Range Rider.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The Range Rider. Best hamburgers in Enterprise, Oregon.
All right, guys, we are reaching the end of our time. So if anybody has any questions, please just put it into that chat and we will relay it. In the meantime, I just wanted to know what advice you had for young artists who are trying to get into it, or young veteran artists who are getting into it.
Well, I guess it's the same advice for both of them, veterans or non-veterans. Is just follow your heart. If you want to make something expressive, do it, and do not worry about what other people think about it. Some of the best work was slammed is crap. Until someone saw it enough to realize that there's a pattern in that creative process that any particular artist does. Your first piece you make is probably not going to be a masterpiece. But 100 pieces, 1,000 pieces or more down the road, that first piece was instrumental in where you are at that point. So keep working.
Yeah.
As that guy said to me, just keep working. Don't worry about where you're going to go. Just keep working. Everything will follow.
LaDonna Benedict wants to tell you, thank you so much. This was liberating.
Oh, thank you, LaDonna. That's awesome. That's great. You need to be liberated.
We all do.
Don't worry about what anybody thinks.
Well, well, on that note, Michael, thank you so much again for taking the time speaking with us. And then thank you for, again, your years of art making and amazing things that you've put out there. And actually, Laura Balance, the executive director at the Hudgens, so you got the bigwig talking to you.
Ooh.
She says, thank you so much, Michael. I so admire your work and your approach to the creative process. Also, I like you more knowing that you're a CBGB guy over Studio 54.
True dat. Yeah. I like CBGBs. Pretty noisy place though. Well, Tai, thank you very much, and Kate for allowing me to be interviewed on this. It's
thank you so much for coming on, and it was just such a pleasure getting to talk to you and meet you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thanks, Spec 4.
All right, Spec 4. Oh, I gotta get it. I have to get a promotion sooner or later.
Sooner or later.
Well,
all right.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Take care.